were to be looked at by our descendants, like a Dead Sea Scroll in 1,000 years' time, what would you think it's worth telling that generation?
Mind spins in spirals like the Curt I think, therefore, but do I even know? Hume said the sun might not rise in the morning. Patterns ain't proof, just habits we adorn. Russell's teapot floating out in the void. Invisible doubts that can't be destroyed. Belief ain't a bird and the skeptic employs. Question the noise, the cosmos ploys. Skeptic's eyes always peeping the fraud. Truth ain't handed down, it's wrestled from the gods. Doubts my temple, my faith is flawed. Think it through twice before I applaud. Induction wobbles like a table with no leg. Hume's knife cuts leave certainty begging. A billion white swans, blowing black renegade. Shatter the mirror, the cracks cascade. Cogito feels strong, but is it really? Thoughts build castles, clouds act silly. Russell's pot spins in the ether so freely. Prove it exists or the claim's too dreamy. Am I the dreamer or the dream in the show? The car wrestled devils, still didn't know. Faith and senses, they play tricks on a low. Truth's a mirage in a desert of woe.
When you are studying any matter or considering any philosophy, ask yourself only what are the facts and what is the truth that the facts bear out. Never let yourself be diverted either by what you wish to believe or by what you think could have beneficent social effects if it were believed. But look only and solely at what are the facts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Skeptic Philosophy. I am your host today, and we have with us Curt, and we are discussing the subject of Yahweh and Yahweh's origins. Thank everybody for stopping in. We're going to get right into it after we get an introduction here from Curt. Curt, introduce yourself, man.
Yeah, I'm a non-specialist in either archaeology or history. This is a personal interest of mine from having grown up believing all this stuff and gradually deconstructing over, 10 or 15 years. So I've always found it fascinating, and I've read a lot about it. And a lot of what I'm going to discuss today does come from a specific source, which is a book by Mark Smith called The Early History of God, Yahweh and Other Deities in Ancient Israel. And I think it's a valuable book, but obviously there are positions that he takes that I don't take, and I'm responsible for what I'm saying today, not him. But if you have any questions or anything, we can do this completely free form, but I do have slides that we can look at if you want.
We're going to go ahead and drop your slide page up on the screen here, and I'll let you take it away.
Sure. So what we want to talk about is the origin of the idea of Yahweh. And I am going to say, starting off methodologically, we're going to give priority to verifiable non-confessional documents and verifiable archaeological structures before we examine the confessional documents or the stories that were told in the Bible or other texts, because texts are usually going to be, to some degree, in the ancient era, propaganda, regardless of what their sacred status was for the people who were consuming those texts, right? So the earliest mention we have of a unit called Israel is in the Merneptah Stele from Egypt. And in the Merneptah Stele, we see a description by the pharaoh Merneptah of his destruction of all the people groups and cities in Palestine around, I believe it's 13th century. I'm not 100% sure.
1350, I think, is where they placed that one.
Oh, 14th century then. Okay, so this is in 1350. And he mentions Israel as a people group, not a city. There's a way to mark that in hieroglyphic writing of the time. And he says that Israel is destroyed, his seed is no more, which, of course, we know was not true, right? So that's the first time we get that name. But between 1350 and the 10th century, we really see. Sorry, go ahead.
Correction on that. I apologize. 1350 was another document. I mixed the two up. When you're talking about 1213 to 1203 is where they're placing it.
Okay, so 13th century. So,
yep.
But we do see basically an archaeological silence on the term between that time and the 10th century, where in the 10th century, we definitely do start to see like specific mentions of both Bible-related documents and terminology, but also we start to see things that specifically are starting to look like what we associate with the worship of Yahweh in Yahwistic terms. But we have to really look at the origin there. What we see is that there's continuity in like Palestine, there's continuity in geographic Israel. And what we find is that Yahweh doesn't have any characteristics that make him particularly unique within the older Northwest Semitic religious tradition. So in the oldest Northwest Semitic tradition, you have a head god, a father god, a leader god, whose name is El, and you have a lord. The word Baal literally means Lord and literally means master, such that in biblical Hebrew, the term for husband is Baal. So it's very clear cut that this word was not anathematized or considered demonic by the people who spoke day-to-day Hebrew language. And what we find is that the biblical books that we have today, Genesis and Exodus, are explaining how things exist during the like late monarchic, early exilic period of the history of Israel, and not actual like historical facts that are documentable. They're not history. They just explain the patterns that the people who were living at the time that these books were being written would know as patterns. And that the idea that this story is somehow unique or tells the actual history of the universe is a much, much later ideological claim that doesn't seem to be current for people who believe in the tradition until after the Hellenistic era with Alexander the Great. And the way we know this is through the researches of a guy named Jonathan Adler, who works in Israel and has done extensive archaeological research. And what he sees is that around the 10th century, which is when we start to see some of these early tablets and stelae, you start to see the absence of pig bones in the highlands of modern geographic Israel. And so what he can see is that there's a moment there where a group that's previously continuous with the population surrounding it starts to differentiate itself by not eating pigs, but they don't necessarily stop being continuous in the rest of their behaviors with that group at that time. So we're going to say that narrative grammar matters more than just the name of a deity. If there's a stable structure and the
Curt,
way the
Curt,
deity...
Can I get some clarification on something?
Sure.
The reason that it's significant that we're not finding the pig bones is because there's a cultural shift, right? Is what we're talking about.
Yeah, correct. So this
the
would
Deuteronomical recognition.
We don't know exactly what the characteristics of the people group that Merneptah is talking about were, but we do see that in conjunction with that name, in the 100 to 200 years after that name is used, we start to see the disappearance of pig bones and highland settlements in what is like modern day Israel, right? So, and what I'm going to say here is that the narrative grammar of a god matters more than what the name of the god is, right? we have Superman today, right? But we know that Superman is also Clark Kent, and we know that Superman is also Kal-El. So it's the characteristics of the character that create that stable structure and shared tradition, not necessarily a specific name. So if I say that Thor has adopted the alias on Earth of Theodore Stevens, but he's really the god Thor, I haven't changed anything except the marker that I'm using to denote that god, right? And so if we deny that continuity, we're doing a kind of special pleading. We're saying, oh, I get that this person had all the same characteristics, or this god had all the same characteristics as the previous one, but they're actually a substantially different character. And that's not a literary move that I think is safe to make. The book of Genesis, as it is written, is just all etiological myth. There's simply nothing within the book of Genesis that can be reliably established as historical. And that's the consensus of modern scholarship, right? Modern scholarship says the earth was not created in the way that is described in Genesis. The Garden of Eden did not exist as it's described in Genesis. The flood did not take place as it's described in Genesis. The Tower of Babel and the patriarchs, all of those things simply did not take place as far as we know. However, what they are is an explanation of how the world would have gotten to the point of the Deuteronomistic narrative. That's the central narrative of the Hebrew scriptures. And that narrative, we know, is formulated around the late monarchic period, the time of King Josiah in the 8th and 7th century, and then fully fleshed out in the time of the exile in Babylon, right? So we don't have any archaeological trace of any patriarchal narrative, and there is no Ugaritic or other narrative that suggests that there was a person named Abraham, a person named Isaac, or a person named Jacob who becomes Israel. There's simply no Middle Bronze nomadic horizon that we can tell. The story of Abraham doesn't seem to match the domestication of camels that we find in the archaeological record. And this is just a textual tradition that would explain the Babylonian origins of some Hebrew practices, like Sabbath keeping, that would have come to the Levant with Abraham at that time. And then it explains things like the character Israel or Jacob raising up a large stone at Bethel for a symbol of his covenant with the god Yahweh, right? So we don't see any evidence in other texts that these narratives were known until the authorship of the Bible. And in fact, a check digit on this is the book of Job, right? Job just doesn't tell us that story. It tells us a different story. So following Finkelstein and Silberman's book, The Bible Unearthed, what we can say is the patriarchs are literary figures. The Genesis is reflecting that time frame that we talked about before of King Josiah. The Exodus is not recoverable history, and Israel emerges indigenously in Canaan as a separate people group and not as some separate lineage that came out of Egypt. And what we need to understand is that the Genesis narrative, specifically in telling the story of Cain, is actually telling us something important about the origins of Yahweh. So Cain is a stand-in for a group called the Kenites, probably pronounced Kenite in the original.
We don't know with the vowels on that one.
Yeah, something like that. And what we can say from the Genesis narrative is that Cain is said to be the founder of civic living and metallurgy, and that he has a descendant named Tubal-Cain who creates bronze and iron. And what we know archaeologically is that the northern Sinai and Western Arabia and those areas were the origin of copper metallurgy. That was a very, very productive and valuable industry in that area at that time, and that they really were the first areas where we start to see Yahwism emerge. such that the story in Genesis of Cain is explaining how this group has its name. But there's another group that's associated with this area called the Edomites. So the story in Genesis of Jacob and Esau is an explanation of how Israel and Edom are closely related, and why the Edomites would also be similar in like linguistics and religious structure and believing in Yahweh, but be distinct and be like in some ways antagonistic to the Israelites, right? So the early profile that we see in the archaeological record of Yahweh is that he's from the northern Sinai or southern Israel. This is associated with Seir, Edom, and Teman. He's associated with fire and deserts. He is not yet a rain god, and he is not yet a distant patriarch. And what we need to do is
still a war god, though, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what we need to look at is like, why would we write an Exodus narrative, right? Well, one reason is to get Yahweh into the Sinai, because we know that Yahweh did originate in the Sinai. And so we're going to have him appear initially on Mount Sinai and give the law from Mount Sinai. And we're going to have a worshiping of a golden calf in the Sinai to explain why there's all these calf statues all around Israel that are associated with Yahweh, which there are many of those, right? We found many of those. So like in Exodus, it specifically describes during the Sinai, when Moses was on the mountain, that they built a golden calf and said, this is the God that you worship. Well, why would they say that? Unless a golden calf was the way they worshiped the God Yahweh in the Sinai. And that we see evidence of that at that time, right? So this seems to be the first Yahweh, the Yahweh Teman, and there's description of this Yahweh Teman and a Yahweh of Samaria in what's called the Kuntillet Ajrud inscriptions, which are 9th century like Paleo-Hebrew inscriptions that have been discovered and were first published by archaeologists in 1976. So the Exodus, like I said, is like not a historical event. There's no evidence for a mass migration. Linguistically, the Exodus is simply impossible, right? If people had spent 400 years enslaved to another population, they would never speak their native languages anymore, right? We don't have any evidence of any group maintaining their language through that kind of experience. How would the children be instructed in the old language by the parents when they're being taken by the masters immediately? So the amount of Egyptian loanwords that get into Hebrew is very low, not what we would expect with that kind of cultural imprint. There's zero archaeology to support a Sinai wandering of Israelite people. And the Exodus is just explaining these narrative structures that would have been apparent to late monarchical Israelites and not an actual historical event. And one of the key things that I was thinking about this morning when I was thinking about the talk is in the Hebrew Bible, when people who are Midianites or Moabites or Philistines or anybody else is interacting with Israelites, there's never a translator. They always can talk to one another with no problem, right? That's never seems to be an issue in the biblical narratives. Well, what does that mean? That means they all spoke the same language. They all had the same like thought structures. They were coming from cultural similarities. So
or it's narrative driven. That's another.
Yeah, or it's made up. It could just be made up. But
Yeah.
even if it were made up, if that linguistic friction had been there, the authors might have felt compelled to like document it or mention something about translation problems or something. But there's no question that Jezebel and Ahab speak the same language, and that Jezebel is very comfortable directing Israelites without Ahab being around or having a translator there to tell what's going on. Another key characteristic here where we can see that there's a problem is that Egyptians like love their rivers. Like in Egypt, the river is the central fact of life, and it's the, Egypt is the gift of the Nile. So there's nothing in religious structures in Egypt that is anti-river, whereas the whole Exodus narrative and the whole like Hebrew Bible structure of Yahweh is anti-sea and river, right? Think about what literally the story of the Exodus is like destroying the Nile and destroying the Red Sea, right? Yahweh is always attacking water, and the Exodus is sort of anti-Egyptian propaganda. And it knows it's propaganda because it doesn't name the Pharaoh. It just calls him Pharaoh. It's like having a narrative in English where, the American is named president. President who? President what? President when? We wouldn't ask that question unless we thought that there was a historical nature to it. But obviously the people who are writing this know there's no history to it, so they don't.
There's another theory on that, Curt. There's another theory on that. Justin from Esoteric mentioned it also, that it's likely that if the story is being written much later, they don't want to mismatch the Pharaoh timeline. So they're not saying who the Pharaoh is because they don't really know the timeline of the Egyptians.
And that's not that different, right? It's basically saying, oh, the president. When we don't have to say, then we can't get caught out, right?
Yep.
So, and we have loads of pre-Israelite evidence of this myth being a huge issue in the Baal cycle, right? So in the Baal cycle, it's basically an annual cycle where Baal has to defeat the chaos dragon, and then he does battle with a death god named Mot, and he is temporarily vanquished by the death god Mot until the goddess Anat can bring him back to life in the fall, where he brings the rains and he rules from on top of his mountain, right? And so we see loads of these types of metaphors associated with the Baal cycle being attributed in later eras after Yahweh is imported north to the higher places in Judah and Samaria, such that, and again, the whole story, the 10 lost tribes and all that, we know that's not an accurate depiction of what really took place, because there are believers in Yahweh in Samaria at the time of Jesus. Like, the 10 lost tribes weren't that lost if they were still around as Samaritans in the first century, right?
Yeah.
So the core myth here is that the leader god, and sorry about this spear being like broken in half. Obviously, these are AI slides.
Yeah.
But the leader god, the Baal or the Yahweh, rides a chariot and defeats Leviathan or Tehom or Tiamat, depending on which particular structure of it is. But there's a god who attacks the sea as a symbol of chaos. The monster is defeated, and you get order and kingship established through that. And this is just a stable grammar. There's no difference in the way it's described with Baal in the Ugaritic texts that we have, and the way that it's described when it's described to Yahweh in the biblical Hebrew texts that we have. And we have a thing called the Tel Osmar seal that dates back to 2200 BCE. So this would date to earlier than the time of the purported Abraham on most biblical timelines, but it shows a Baal-like figure, or at this time it could have been a god like Dagon or El, who's spearing a seven-headed dragon. And yet we see the seven-headed dragon showing up in the Psalms as something that is defeated by Yahweh, and even showing up in the book of Revelation in the Christian New Testament as something that is still being used as a metaphor. So this to me is fairly compelling evidence of continuity and not rupture. And this means that however we want to describe the God Yahweh is adopting a religious vocabulary that is millennia old by the time he's being written about.
Certainly. Hey, let me just say something right quick on that.
Sure,
Curt.
Go ahead.
This seven-headed serpent also we've had, and I don't know if anybody subscribes or watches any of Dan McClellan or any of the other scholar channels on this. He's talked about this subject, that modern apologetics tries to write this off to being symbolic or of states, or being symbolic of the devil, and that many biblical scholars, as well as Dan McClellan, says this is clearly not the case. This serpent is a reference to older ideologies and God's slaying this, just plain and simple.
All right. So we talked a little bit about the Baal cycle, and Baal is fighting a being called the Yam, who represents the chaos, but he's also written as Lotan or Leviathan. And then Baal battles with Mot, and after defeating Mot, the death god, his storm, war, and kingship are unified on a mountain called Mount Zaphon. And we know that from the book of Job, this was the narrative for Yahweh as well. Job basically uses this exact narrative to justify the actions of his deity. There's no apologetic to say, by the way, this isn't Baal that we're talking about here, or this isn't part of that cycle that you know about. You just change the names. Nothing else has changed in Job. So Job is clearly showing continuity and not any kind of rupture or change in the status of the deity. So in Psalm 74, we see Yahweh crushing the heads of the Leviathan. And in Isaiah 51, we see him destroying Rahab. Now, Rahab is actually a symbol for Egypt in many texts, but is also a demonic serpent who's in the water. So we see the same mythic structure, and we just see different names. So this is like I was talking about Kal-El and Superman. In Exodus 7, there's an interesting scene where Moses and Aaron are trying to get the Pharaoh to relent. And in English, these staff transformations are translated as having become snakes or serpents. But the reality is that they become chaos dragons, or tanin, which is the chaos monster. It's not a simple snake. And so Yahweh's chaos monster is now swallowing the chaos crocodiles, probably, of the Egyptian pharaoh. And the pharaoh is just a symbol. We already talked about this. He's just an embodiment of an empire. This isn't a history. This isn't some sort of actual pharaoh or Ramses the Great, as some people try to make it. He's just a mythic placeholder. So we talked a little bit before about Mount Zaphon, and Mount Zaphon is the home of the god Baal Melkart, who actually has a resurrection cycle where he falls asleep and has to be brought back awake. This is his cosmic mountain, and it's a place of storm and kingship and battle. And there is actually a psalm that describes Mount Zion being in the far north, which Mount Zion is not in the far north. And this may very well reflect a previous version of the text that actually was simply using Mount Zaphon as the mountain of Yahweh. And again, when we see like ancient polytheistic deity types, what we see is that it's very common for there to be a Marduk of Babylon, and then there will be another Marduk of the Hittites, or something like that. We can see Dionysus for the Greeks, and then he's also in some areas called Liber, and in Roman texts he's called Bacchus.
Can you give us any specificity on this Marduk and what we're talking about as a role?
Marduk was Babylonian, so he wasn't directly analogous to Yahweh. I'm just saying that different gods of different locations would still be considered the same god, but have different valences, right? So the best way to explain that is Dionysus for the Greeks is still the god of wine and the god of like festivals and things like that. But as Bacchus, he's the Roman god of wine and festivals, and he has slightly different depictions and slightly different images, right? So what we see this with Yahweh, where we talked previously about Yahweh of Teman and also Yahweh of Samaria, and obviously we know of Yahweh of Zion, right? So it's very likely that if the description of these gods is the same, and the structure of them having divine kingship, ruling storms, being war gods, and all that is the same, then their descriptions of the same god type. And in fact, we actually have late Hellenistic writers who argue that Yahweh was actually a form of Dionysus as well, and this was understood by Greeks at the time. So the Mount Zion is referred to in the Psalms using the exact same terms as some of the Ugaritic texts from the late Bronze Age refer to Mount Saphon. It's simply a mountain where the god enthrones his political power. And of course, that's exactly what Mount Zion is seen as in the Deuteronomistic narrative. And it's important for people to understand what the Deuteronomistic narrative is. The history of the Israelite monarchy is that it starts in the 10th century with the theoretical unified monarchy, which, if it existed at all, was much, much less impressive than what we see written about in the text. And then it's split into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And the northern kingdom was characterized by kings like Omri and Ahab, who was of Ahab and Jezebel. And this dynasty was replaced a couple of times, but eventually was destroyed by the Assyrians, whereas the Assyrians did not wipe out the Jewish dynasty that was centered in the southern kingdom. And there were many southern kings who existed for 3 or 4 centuries. But eventually the final southern king was a King Josiah. And the story is that King Josiah, while reconstructing the Hebrew temple in Jerusalem, found a book. And this book was the book of Deuteronomy. But what scholars now see is that the author of the Deuteronomistic narrative was mixing and matching and created an entire history of the Israelite people. And so there are portions of this Deuteronomistic narrative that are present in Genesis, Exodus, present in Joshua, present in Judges, present in 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, the Kings and Chronicles books. There are varying traditions that had been written about this, and it's all redacted together into a single narrative around that time, just prior to the exile. And so they're drawing from those traditions. And we had talked already about this. The Samaritan Yahwism was the same Yahweh using the same Torah. They just used a different mountain, but had the same mythic grammar. And we know there was a Yahweh of Samaria. We know there was a Yahweh of Jerusalem. And this Deuteronomistic narrative is trying to explain to people who are being taken into exile how this all makes sense. Baal's depicted as a bull, and Yahweh is also depicted as a bull. Golden calves were symbols of Yahweh throughout the monarchical period, and we have lots of archaeology of this sort of thing, but the theology has to suppress this, so we get an Exodus narrative where everybody has to drink like molten gold and die because they worshipped a golden calf, and this is all terrible, when in reality, probably it was just how people throughout the monarchic period worshipped Yahweh.
Let me give a quick injection there, Curt. I wanted to let people know Genesis 49 and 24, where it says mighty one of Jacob. When it says mighty one, it actually says Abir Yah Aquab, and the Abir there that is translated as mighty actually comes from the root word of bull. And this was regularly used. There was a Hebrew word called coke that they could refer to him as might or force, but Yahweh, God was regularly referred to as this Abir, that the might specifically had the connotation of a bull. So I just want to throw that's why a lot of scholars think there was a lot of association.
Yeah, it could be translated bullish in modern English, for example. So the name doesn't show that there's discontinuity. Names track culture and power. It doesn't mean that there was any change in belief, and it's the structure of the worship that matters the most. So prior to Josiah, what we see is very, very simple, continuous architecture and archaeology, whereby at a sacred site, this site could be anywhere in the Palestinian area, you would see a standing stone, usually with either tree next to it or a pole next to it. And these combinations of standing stones and trees would often be on what are called high places. And the tree could be referred to as a tree. Elah was the Hebrew word, or it could be referred to as an Asherah, which would be a pole put up to worship the goddess Asherah. And we see textual evidence of Yahweh being worshipped with his Asherah from both the northern Sinai and Samaria.
Yeah.
But Baal is also noted to have a consort who is also referred to as either Anat or Asherah in the Ugaritic texts. So all this is continuity. And one of the things that I like to point out is if Baal was the enemy god of the Israelites during the monarchic period, how could they have that as the functioning lingua franca word for husband, right? You have to recode those types of words if they're common words, if they're anathematized, right? Look at English. The word for rabbit up until the 19th century was C-O-N-E-Y, and it rhymed with honey and money. It was pronounced the same way. But in the 19th century, it became not a great thing to go around saying cunny this, cunny that, cunny the other, because it started to sound like a swear word, right? So we had to find a new word to call that long-eared little lagomorph that bounces around. And so we developed the word rabbit. And so we had to recode this relatively unimportant concept of this animal that jumps around because of a slightly negative association with something. And we can see that also like with many other words that just stop being used because of their phonetics, right? It's just not a great look to use how the word sounds in modern English. Well, if Baal was the enemy god, how could it be also the name for master and servant and Lord in biblical Hebrew? It just doesn't make sense. So what this is all these prophetic narratives against Baal and against all this stuff are just a later tradition trying to anathematize a previous tradition. And you see the Bible is loaded with getting rid of these standing stones and poles and high places. And again, in Josiah, like what's King Josiah such a great king and God loving him so much for? Because he gets rid of all the standing stones and poles and high places and groves where people are worshiping. Well, the analogy for me is like we don't have a lot of people who are writing physics books about why the luminiferous ether doesn't exist anymore. Like that's just not a live thing. So it would be very unusual for someone to come out with a book in 2026 that says the ether is bullshit, you know, because there's no one around who's like believing in the ether. We don't need to outlaw it. We don't need to ban it. We just like don't pay any attention to it because it's not a thing. So if King Josiah is going around getting rid of all this shit in the 7th century, it probably had just existed throughout the monarchic period and it wasn't a big deal. And that structure of like belief has to go continuously with the structure of Baal. The Christianity even there continues the same grammar, right? We have the same chaos defeat in imagery in Christianity. In the book of Revelation, we see the same vindication where like the order of the universe is recreated once the chaos serpent is defeated in Revelation. And even Mark lacks bodily resurrection, which is what we see with the traditions of Baal or Tammuz, where it's just a seasonal cycle. Mark may not even be writing what he considers a historical narrative as much as an allegorical one. So if we find in 1,000 years that there's a flying invulnerable hero named Dumbledore who can leap tall buildings in a single bound and can get shot with bullets and they bounce off of him, and he's originally from a planet called Kryptonite, and he has like a girlfriend whose name is Bois Bane, we're not going to say, oh, I don't know where that came from. That must have been a completely brand new tradition that no one had ever thought of or even imagined. It was an entirely different thing from Superman. It couldn't have had a continuity with that. We would recognize literarily that that's a ridiculous position because literary analysis allows us to see that continuity. So what we see is that Genesis is a myth. It's an etiological tale. It's not historical. Exodus is a political theology to explain to the people at the time of Josiah and the early exile why things looked the way that they did. Yahweh is just an inherited deity who gets into the like Highland culture of modern day Israel by diffusion and combination of Yahwistic traits from the northern Sinai and Baal traits from the greater Levantine. And the story that we see in the Bible is an attempt by people who were literally genius level artists, right? The art level here is spectacular. It altered the world in a way that almost no other art has in human history. But it was not a unique history of a unique people who'd been picked by a unique God. There's simply no evidence for that.
Yeah. Yep, great presentation. We still got 20 minutes left. You got a bit more in you, or you want me to put some slides up there and we'll...
Yeah, and I'm happy to go through anything. And if there's anything that you had wanted to get through that we didn't get a chance to cover.
Let me put something up here and let me pull this one down. Oop, there we go. I'm going to skip here. Let's see how I skip here. We're going to... Oh, I see how I do it. Boop. Let's see. So I wanted to make a few things clear that we had talked about kind of along the way. This term with the mountain, before we started getting the use of the word Yahweh, we see the ideal from Exodus that Abraham and them, as you see on the text here, that I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but my name Yahweh was not known to them. So the ideal is that until Moses, no one would have knew this God by Yahweh. And we even get this in Exodus 3 and 13, that this is when it was first revealed. The name Yahweh was revealed to Moses. So that's starting the ideal of a timeline that Abraham and them wouldn't have known that. But I wanted to say this about El Shaddai. This term El Shaddai, there's an association with mountains, as you mentioned. And the best I understand this is that, and let me see if we covered it in the next. Oh yeah. So this El Shaddai combines the word all powerful. This is what people traditionally have said the word means, all powerful. The El Shaddai, but it does not have a root word. It doesn't connect to this term with any roots. As I mentioned earlier, there's two different power words that we use. And one is it uses the BR kind of connotation. That is power. That is where we got the abri. That is like the might of a bull. And the other one is coke. I think it's just said coke with a strong K kind of sound. And that's the two primary root words of power or might. So El Shaddai does not have that in there at all. But the other thing was that people use mountains as symbols of power regularly. And it is possible that what was being meant there was this Shaddada from the Hebrew, or this and you'll even pull this on the Wikipedia page if you pull up El Shaddai, that many scholars are suggesting this might have come from the Akkadian, from Shadu. But this is almost like saying mountain god or mountain power god, the El Shaddai, which traditionally got translated as all powerful. But that's what the older ones would have known him as. And then we move forward a little bit, and this is where I pulled the 1330 from. So this is when we get the first reference of the YHWH. We get it in the Greek, and you can pull this off of Wikipedia or anywhere else where we see this YHWH, and there's a little bit of tear from my understanding of how scholars think the not diphthongs, but the pronunciation of this was supposed to go. Some think it was said Yahu or Yahweh is how they believe that the Egyptians would have said it. But what we get in here is that they refer to them as the Shasa. So this is the first time that it appeared in a text, and it referred to the Shasa of Yahweh, which is like the nomadic followers of. They think later the word Shasa wound up transforming into something that meant people who engaged in brigandry or nomads, that they lived by kind of raiding other tents. This is almost like desert pirates. So the ideal is that that this is how they were first identified, not as as a group, but kind of as a or not as a people, but as a cultural group that were following the Yahoo, right? And this
Yeah,
the first
and
time that we
I
get the
didn't
reference.
I didn't mention this, but the association of Baal with tents
Yeah.
and the god El with tents. There's an El Kunirsa who is associated with tents in the Ugaritic texts, and Yahweh is also associated with tents and nomadism. So this would be another reason to make an Exodus narrative, and there is a tradition of raising tents for Baal in the Ugaritic that's like 1200 to 1300. That definitely predates the Jewish ceremony of Sukkot. And Sukkot obviously persists, to today. But when you read the Transfiguration narrative of Mark in a certain way, what you can see is that after Jesus appears with Elijah and Moses, Peter comes forward and says, "Let's raise tents for each of you three." Well, this is a recreation of the Sukkot narrative, right? And what does Jesus do? He just like, fuck that. I don't want anything to do with that, and just walks away, which is like part of the narrative, right? The Christian move is to say, oh, yes, all this Israelite stuff was real and it was fine, but we've superseded it now. We're just going to use the text for ethical instruction and how to be a good person, but we don't have to follow those holidays and rules. And Paul's very explicit about that.
Yeah. So this is what he was talking about. This is one of the tablets that he was talking about earlier, not to be messed with the Mesha, but this is the one that first mentions Israel. So it's the first, we still don't get a connection yet with the Israel people and Yahweh. The dating on this one's 1230 to 1203. This is BCE, so we're counting the time backwards. And in this one, you'll see where the Israel's highlighted. Israel is laid waste. Its seed is no more. And goes on from there. So this is the first reference that we see of Israel in any text. Is the oldest known location of the term.
And that's correct. And this is a good translation. There's no good way to translate it appropriately in English, but some of these are place names and some of these are people names, and that is carved out in the Egyptian. And Israel is a people name, not a place name.
Right. It's a people name. So now the first time that we actually get the name that we're positive that this is the name. We think we saw the Yahoo association. Some scholars are divided on this, but I think we've gotten something of a consensus that the Egyptian texts that they were referring to Yahweh. But there are some that are still primarily in the Christian group that they reject that. This is kind of an uncontested one. And this one, we get this one. This is 840 BCE. We're counting closer down here. And this one, we have a similarity also in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'm going to flip back and forward. I want you to see inside of the box here, because this is Dead Sea Scrolls, and this is written in Aramaic in this case. But what you'll see, the name of God or Yahweh is actually used in Paleo Hebrew. They still write it in Paleo Hebrew, and this is almost exactly the same as the writing. But this is a different. I'm trying to think of the name of this. This is this type of language, or the type of script it is. But anyway,
the Paleo Hebrew. So this may be important too. There is certainly a way you could view the Israelite script as having descended from an Egyptian script, but it does not descend directly from Egyptian hieroglyphs. What happens is that the Egyptian hieroglyphs are repurposed, some small number of them, by the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians develop a local script. Yeah. And then the Phoenician script is converted into this Paleo Hebrew script using some specific characters that have specific sound configurations, but that the biblical Hebrew, the way biblical Hebrew is written, is a reworking of this Paleo Hebrew script with the Aramaic script that became popular later, such that it's a mixture of both earlier Phoenician scripts and
so this
Aramaic
is Phoenician
script.
Is what this is.
It's more Phoenician. It's not. There are scholars who argue this is simply Phoenician writing, And there are scholars who try to split it out and say, well, no, it's an earliest form of Hebrew. But the key point is that people who were able to write in this script would have been able to talk to people in Tyre and Sidon or any of these Phoenician places with zero problem and zero interpreters, and no different than somebody from Scotland is able to come to America and walk
have the
around
conversation.
today.
Yeah, Dr. Justin, I can't think of his last name, but from Esoteria, which has done interviews and talked about, he's probably one of the most knowledgeable people that you'll find online. I'll put a link on some of his videos. He talked on this subject, and he said that if you have learned Paleo Hebrew, you should be able to read much of this Phoenician and not have any problem with it. It's just that similar. Moving on now, this is the Mesha. This is the Mesha script that I think was mentioned earlier. Just I'm trying to pull the dating on this Mesha one. Thought I had this. Oh yeah, we already had this one back. So this is the 840 Mesha script. I tried to color code these so that I didn't mix these damn things up.
Right, and the Book of Ruth actually makes no sense unless this linguistic phenomenon is happening. Right? How is Ruth falling in love with Boaz and they're getting married if they don't even speak the same language? Which on the traditional like Exodus, Joshua, Judges narrative, there's just no reason for linguistic identity between these people groups. They should be vastly different. Yeah.
So this is where we get the name Yahweh that first appears in this. That we're clear. It's distinct that we're talking about the name Yahweh. This is from the Moabite king here, Mesha, that has just made quite a victory against the Israeli people. And he mentions on here, you'll see there towards the bottom, for I devoted them to Ashtar Chemosh, which is the patron god of the Moab people. And I took from them the vessels of Yahweh and offered them before Chemosh. So he defeated Israel people, and then he took those vessels. We don't know what the different offerings or whatnot was, but he placed those and wind up giving them before Chemosh. And something that I noted on here is Solomon even built a shrine to Chemosh up on a mountain. Correct. As you mentioned earlier, they always wind up building these up on a mountain. So he built some kind of shrine. We don't think it was a temple, but we do believe that it was a shrine on one of the mountains. This is mentioned in 1 Kings 11:7, where he winds up building this to Chemosh. So Chemosh, even by 930 here, still very popular, but this with Solomon happened before the ordeal of the Mesha. It's about 100 years prior to that.
And just another quick thing about that is the idea that these gods are not all the same is technically true, right? But Chemosh has many characteristics that are very, very similar to Yahweh. And like if Solomon is doing this at this time in the biblical text, and there's like all this upsettedness in the Deuteronomistic narrative about that, what we should see is like complete anathematization of that sort of activity by the 4th or 5th century.
Oh, absolutely.
But what we don't see is that exact thing, because the Elephantine papyrus show conclusively that there is worship in Egypt by a Jewish population that's corresponding with Jerusalem. And this group wants to build their own temple in Egypt, not in Jerusalem, which they're getting approval to do. And this temple is going to be to Yahweh and Anet Yahweh. And Anat is the Asherah version of the Northwest Semitic people from back, in the 1200, 1100 late Bronze Age time frame. And people had like no problem worshiping this goddess consort of Yahweh in Egypt long after the exile.
So I wanted to mention this on the monotheism. There's a little bit of a debate on this subject, and people go different ways on this. If you listen to or read anything from Dr. Mark S. Smith on this, which is written exclusively on this, he is a Christian.
He's the one whose book I used a lot of.
So he takes it that monotheism didn't really start in till about 600 in the 7th century. 7 or or 7th or 6th century, he puts it that this is
Yeah,
where monotheism
the
starts.
late Josiah, early exilic
Right,
period,
like
for
Josiah.
sure.
Yeah. Whereas we still do have many skeptic or more critical scholars that don't think that we truly get monotheism through the entire thing, and that what we get is more of this henotheism that is my God is the centerpiece of all the other gods. He's above all the rest, and there's this kind of comparative. So one of the things that we play with, and you'll see in Psalms 96:5, which you'll hear a lot of theists will reference this, for all the gods of the people are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. And the ideal in this text is that the theists will say that that means they're just idols. They're not real gods. But this is a play with some words. There are two different words here that they are pronounced almost exactly the same, said the same, but they are written slightly different. And that's Elohim and Elohim. And one is like idols, and which can in some sense mean worthless things, and the other is Elohim, that we see gods referred to regularly as. So when you see this in Psalms 96 and you see it in Psalms 115, you see this, it says, for all the gods, it'll use Elohim of the people are, and then it'll call them Elohim or idols, but it refers to them first as gods or a part of pantheons, and then it says that they are worthless things, that the Lord made the heavens. And in the case of the Lord here, I'm trying to think of the word that we get that ends up getting transferred over to the Lord, but it does seem like it's Elohim or something like that. I'd have to look.
Well, if it's in biblical Hebrew, it's usually Baal.
No, it wouldn't have been Baal in here in Psalms. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah,
but one of the things that is present in the Psalms and is also present in, I think, Isaiah and also in Jeremiah is this polemic against worshiping stone and wood. And that's seen as like just like somebody's carving out a Ganesha figure today or something like that. But no, it's a direct polemic against the standing stones and the poles, stone and wood together. There's like several, I think there's one in Ezekiel and one in Ezra where like the stone cries out or the wood speaks. And those are, again, these are anti-Israelite practices that are being called out by the prophets about Israel, not about people who are worshiping from somewhere else.
Yeah, let me draw a little better line on this subject so that some of you understand what we're talking about. So there is a little bit of a division between the North and the South worshipers of Yahweh that tends to develop here. And what we have the Israel people and we have the Judean people. And this is kind of the North and the South have different ideas about. And the South does not like symbols. They don't like the graven image things. They don't want the symbols of the bull to be associated with Yahweh. Whereas the North and the Israel area, this is not a problem. They're all in on this. And we've had some scholars that suggested that the golden calf, the whole text of the golden calf is a dig from the southern followers on the northern followers, that they make idols of calves and whatnot unto Yahweh, and that this is a dig on that. So we have kind of a division on this. And then when 722, when we get it's not the Babylonians. Who is it that comes in 722 and winds up taking
the Assyrians?
The Assyrians. The Assyrians come in, take control.
King Hezekiah era.
There you go. So then you have a flight from Israel that winds up being, they come down into the southern area, they come down into Judea, and they're absorbed. They're opened arms, they're let in. But then there's this opportunity for reform. Now we have everybody that's come down here. We're going to get rid of all these idols. We're going to get rid of all this. And then we found the scrolls of Deuteronomy and so forth. Just trying to help put some of the timeline together. We are going to be open here in just a few minutes and let other people come in here. I'm going to go ahead and grab the link to see if somebody does want to come up here on the.
Yeah, and arguably the question of whether the Jewish people were monotheist persists all the way down, such that this is totally not something we have time to get into deeply, but I'm of the opinion that the very first strain of Christianity was not monotheist. books, that it specifically was Marcionite, in that it postulated there was a demiurge, that the demiurge's name probably was Yahweh or Yaldabaoth or something like that, and that the sacrifice of Jesus was to ransom the people from that law-giving deity.
Yeah, there's some arguments now that some scholars are starting to take that Marcionite's version of Luke might have predated what we now have as the version of Luke. That Marcionites might not have, because they were blamed by early church fathers as Marcionite's Luke being all cut up version of Luke. But we're thinking that it might be the bare bones version, that we don't know the entire thing. But I think one of the early church fathers wrote basically his whole version of Luke in their book.
What's so weird is that we have a whole gospel that's named Mark, and they were these Marcionites who like had a gospel that didn't have a birth narrative and didn't end the way the other gospels end, and had Jesus just being inhabited by
We're
a
getting
spirit.
off track here. We'll get back on that in the Q&A.
So weird that we have that.
It's very weird. It's very weird. But yeah, so anyway.
But it's not the same. They're not the same.
Different. Okay. I'm not totally bought in that, but I know it's a strong theory. But Deuteronomy 32. So we get this in there. Please pay attention to this, because we got two different versions that are going on. If you read the KJV, I pulled from one of the most recommended scholarly books, which is the New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition, and how this reads out. And it says, when the Most High apportioned the nations, when he divided humankind, he fixed the boundaries of the people according to the number of the gods. The Lord's own portion was his people, Jacob, his allocated share. So the reason that this is
the word you have there.
What's that?
Allotted, not allocated.
I'm sorry. Yeah, his allotted share. This is directly from the New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition. Now, what we get in the original
text,
which is
the correct translation.
I agree. They are one of, it is among the best scholars. It's a highly recommended one. The only one I think that's recommended more by scholars is the annotated Oxford version, which you can't really get for free. You'd have to pay it to get some of that, I think. But that's the most recommended, I think, by scholars presently. But you see in the Hebrew version here, where you see the word at the bottom that's highlighted. Let me see if I can get the...
Well, so there's a distinction here between the Masoretic text and the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint.
Yeah. So what we have is the sons of Elohim, or sons of God, is the best translation that we get here. And this is where the New Revised Standard Version says, according to the number of gods. Now the KJV winds up translating this as that he divided them according to Israel, or something like this.
But that's because they're following,
make any sense.
They're following the Masoretic text. And what scholars say is when the Masoretic text has something that makes more sense on like confessional grounds, and the older traditions in the Dead Sea Scrolls or in the Septuagint are more difficult reading, the more difficult reading is more likely to be correct.
Right. How's it going, man? Deconverted man, how you been?
No, hey, good. How are you guys?
Fantastic, man.
All right. I had a bunch of different questions. I know that I've seen Yahweh's wife statue online. Do we have a statue?
You talking about Asherah?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Do we have a statue of Yahweh? I couldn't remember if we did or didn't.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we have a coin. There's an argument of whether the El God is.
I thought we had
a coin that we're almost positive of.
Oh, okay.
There are images of Yahweh riding a bull that I believe. I don't have the exact like timing of them. But there's no text on it that says that it's Yahweh, but it's from a Yahwistic location. So there's no reason to think that it would be a different God. But like, again, like what the point I'm making is as long as all you've done is change the name, but the imagery is the same, then you're seeing continuity anyway. And we have loads of Ugaritic imagery of Baal riding a bull.
Do we know like other gods that also existed alongside Yahweh at that time? Because Abraham, if there was an Abraham, like he picked Yahweh, and I'm wondering like why he did that. Like, was there a pantheon of gods he could have picked? Maybe he wanted to go to
pick
war.
Yahweh. He didn't pick Yahweh. That again,
Well,
he never would have knew by Yahweh. He knew by El Shaddai.
Okay.
Yeah, and El
So
is the
that's a
father
rewrite.
god in the
Okay.
original Northwest Semitic pantheon. And again, El persists to this day. Just say El, El, really hard, and you're going to get pretty close to a very, very popular god's name, right?
So so the modern Bible really deludes the whole thing by changing everything to the word God.
Translating it into
lose
English
a lot
in
of
a confusing way. Yes.
Yeah,
Correct.
it's like, well, it's all God throughout, and it's like, I know that this is a different God you're talking about here. We need to.
Well, just think, like in English, we translate Sheol, Gehenna, Tartarus, and Hades all as hell. Well, they're different words. They mean different things.
Yeah. So we lose a lot in the translation there, and that feels deliberate to me for doctrinal reasons. But yeah, I mean, I'm more interested in learning the actual history, because when I was a Christian, obviously, didn't know any of this stuff. Never told any of this stuff. That El was Abraham. Well, if there wasn't, again, because I don't know if Abraham was even a thing, but
my theory, there was no such person. He's an etiological tale, just like Adam and Eve and Noah.
Okay, yeah, I mean, because God, or El, is it that you said would have picked him, if anyone, or he would have picked him, either way, however you want to.
Well, the Abraham tradition, again, is written by multiple people, and I believe there is a Yahwistic rendering of parts of the story of Abraham. Abraham's always telling some pharaoh that his wife is his sister and having her go have sex with the pharaoh multiple times. It's like the story of Lot is just a retelling of the story of Noah. There's gods who are angry and they make a judgment on a people, and then they kill those people, and then they have to hide in a cave, and in the cave somebody does something weird with the drunk sex dad.
So
yeah,
they're the same story. They're just rewritten a different way.
Hey, can I make a quick thing on what this is about, and then we'll get right back to it, because we were transitioning from this page where we're seeing the power distributed from someone that is considered the most high here.
Yeah, the leader of the divine council in Job.
Right, the leader of the divine council, which happens over and over, and we actually see this inside of the Greek culture as well. So when we were talking about that document earlier, that is not this one, this one, the Merneptah Stele. One of the things that we get inside of here is we get almost a word for word kind of ideology of that being passed down, that it's kind of divided up. Keep in mind, they had 9 gods that I think they called them the bows, or they called their kingdoms the bows, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think it's in this text. I don't believe it is. But anyway,
you're talking about the Egyptian understanding? Yeah,
yes,
I think
the Egyptians.
Each country was something like a bow, and then the bows are divided into nomes.
So what we had is we had 9 kind of gods of that pantheon, and what you see here is you see in the grant him a life like that of Ray again. And I just mentioned this to somebody the other day, that scholars are actually in widespread agreement that Ra is actually not pronounced as the ah sound, that it's more of a long a on the subject. This is the god that we commonly know as Ra. But this Ray character, they're saying amongst the 9 gods that they want him to be lifted up as the main god of Egypt forever. That Egypt be given to him as dominion amongst the 9. That he be the carrier of power for Egypt. And this is very similar to what we've seen, kind of the El deity, or the Most High, dividing up the nations and given that of Jacob, given that portion to Yahweh forever.
And just real quick, phonetically, like R's and L's are closely related, and vowels move to the front and back of R and L sounds all the time. So there could even be like the Egyptian language and the Semitic languages are quite distant. They're further apart than, say, English and French by a lot. But if they were even distant relatives, it's not hard to imagine Ra
Well, they didn't have
and
vowels,
El,
either one.
right? Ra and El having originally been very similar sounding terms from a very old group that was the founder language for that basic structure.
Is there something like a family tree, if you will, that shows the connections of these different terms?
It's really hard to be confident.
Well, they're in
about
different
these
languages.
assessments.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to go with no, just because they're in different languages.
Okay.
Some of them might wind up having a version over in the other language.
Like if we could see.
I mean, again, there are certainly characteristics. So, like, there's a metallurgy god type, right? Right. So Ptah is the metallurgy god in Egypt, and Hephaestus is the metallurgy god in Greek pantheon. And clearly, originally Yahweh was a metallurgy god. And Ptah in Egyptian theology actually has a source, and then a word, and then a community associated with Ptah, which is kind of like a father and a word and a spirit associated with a Yahweh, right?
So when you say metallurgy, metal?
Yeah, making copper and
so
like
is that based on like the
tools.
wood, fire, earth, wind, metal?
No,
thing,
not quite.
Or is that
that's Greek. That's later, much later.
Oh, okay. Did they? Do we have any inclination of if Yahweh or any of the other gods were borrowed from Egypt or vice versa, or maybe just ideas of them were?
Yeah, so that's very
the
interesting.
mountain ideal goes across all of them. That's one.
Yeah,
but you would expect actually a near one-to-one correspondence if the Exodus narrative had some truth to it, right? We would expect to see pretty close contact, but what we see is nope, nothing. It's mostly conceptual stuff that could easily have started in Egypt, gone to Tyre and Sidon or these Phoenician cities, and then distributed down into Judah and Israel. We mostly see repurposing of Semitic structures and not direct importation of Egyptian structures. Now, the Apis bull with the sun disk in the middle of his horns does have some similarities to the bull of Yahweh. So there is a characteristic similarity there, but it's much less iconography similar.
I think it's more associated with power.
Yeah.
So the bull thing, Yahweh being on a bull or is a bull, which I'm not like clear on which way that goes.
I'm less familiar with on the bull, but being
is he riding the bull or he is okay. Because the golden calf, that's pretty early in the writing. It's like okay, they were worshiping.
No, actually, it's quite late. It's early in the text of the book.
I mean, in the book, it's early.
The writing of the language of the story is written in is mid biblical Hebrew, which is exilic time frame. So the Paleo Hebrew stuff doesn't show any knowledge of the Genesis narrative or the Exodus narrative.
This was spoke about today by Dan McClellan. I shit you not.
Wow.
He made a video talking about this.
The order that we're presented, as if it's this finished text, and when you're a Christian, you're just completely fed this whopper, multiple whoppers of
the ordering of the books of the Bible wasn't completed until the 4th century CE. And the way the books of the Hebrew scriptures are put together in the Septuagint that becomes like the Christian scriptures is consciously edited to make the story of Christianity match with the story of the Hebrew Bible.
Especially in Matthew. That's
undeniable. I guess
the Hebrew scriptures, Hebrews don't put Malachi as the last book, but the Christian scriptures always put Malachi as the last book because you need that prophecy about Elijah coming to forerun the Messiah as the last thing in the Hebrew scriptures before you start reading Matthew.
Wow. And are the Jewish people of today, are they like, how else to put this, worshiping the wrong God? Like, like
No,
instead
I
of
think
Yahweh
there are
or
Jewish people with as much spectrum of belief as there are Christian people. So
yeah, but I mean,
there's
like
no
Yahweh
monolithic
seems like
belief.
the most popular, maybe, or El, or is it El Shaddai?
Well,
or,
Jewish people would never put it that way because they don't say the name of
yeah,
their
they don't
God.
say that.
They
Yeah, they
say
don't even say
Adonai.
GD. Yeah,
But they would say that Adonai is distinct and fundamentally different from any of the other gods if they're Orthodox. But if they're Reformed, they might believe exactly the same thing Robert and I do and just go to Reformed Jewish temple because they like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And we see actually there is a very high percentage of atheist or agnostic among Jewish people.
Oh, yeah,
way
yeah.
home than Christian.
Yeah.
But anyway, let me.
But that doesn't
Anyway,
necessarily
okay, thank
affect
you,
their
thank
religious identity. They may identify
No,
as
absolutely.
atheists, but still go to temple and still go through all the rituals.
It's still
and
culturally
traditions.
significant to them. Yep, absolutely.
Right. Oh, my brother's Jewish. That's why I was curious. Okay. Thank you. That's it.
Hey,
later,
no problem.
Guys.
Hey, later, man. Take care. Thank you for stopping by here.
Oh, yeah.
Wanted to mention this in the Second Kings. This is a prophecy, and I don't know if you've ever talked about this much, Curt, or you know much about this subject, but this is where we get the prophet Elijah says that we're going to get a victory. They're going against the Moab people that we've seen in the Mesha tablet. We don't know that it's the same battle, but they're going against them. And then we get in this 2 Kings 3, this is only a trifle in the sight of the Lord, for he will also hand Moab over to you. You shall conquer every fortified city and so forth. And this is what's told. And then the battle goes on. And then what we get in verse 26, when the king of Moab saw the battle was going against him, he took with him 700 swordsmen to break through the opposite the king of Edom, but they could not. Then he took his firstborn son, who was to succeed him, and offered him as a burnt offering on the wall, and great wrath come upon Israel. So they withdrew from him and returned to their own land. The ideal of this seems to represent that the sacrifice changed the tide of the battle. Now, this was to the god Chemesh, or how do you say it? Chemosh, I think is how you say it, which was the patron god of the Canaanite people of Moab specifically. And we got a sacrifice that changed the tide of the war, is what seems to be representing. And then the prophecy that was prophesied by Elijah failed.
Yeah, obviously George R.R. Martin has read his Bible, because this is literally the Stannis Baratheon story from Game of Thrones. But that said, this is really, really compelling evidence that the tradition that there was no child sacrifice in Israel that's used all the time is just junk. Like, we have archaeological evidence of child sacrifice going on through the monarchic period. We have evidence of child sacrifice in the Phoenician population, extending up to the time of the Punic Wars. And remember that the Punic Wars were fought between people whose names were things like Hannibal and Hasdrubal. And that Baal is Baal. That's the god they worshipped. And we have evidence of human sacrifice happening in Carthage at the time of the Punic War. And what we see in the Hebrew scriptures is Ezekiel specifically calling out the fact that Yahweh told the Israelites that they should sacrifice their children. And again, we see loads of child sacrifice, like descriptions and metaphors in the Hebrew scriptures, including the story of Abraham and Isaac, but much worse, the story of Jephthah, where God will intervene to protect a male child, but when it's a female child who's being sacrificed, God just lets it go through.
Chemosh is who he would have been sacrificing to.
Yeah, correct.
In this case, I think the point that Curt's making on this is it's reflected inside of the text that this child sacrifice to Chemosh was successful.
Yeah. And Edom was an ally of the Israelites in that battle, which would go to them both being Yahwistic.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I went to the wrong tablet. It actually would have been on this tablet that you were seeing the text about Shamash. Again, we don't know that these are the same battles. In fact, the way that it's described as far as the city, it's likely that it's not the same battle. But we see then, if that is the case, that's two different times that that Moab wind up defeating Israel. One's that they seem to be the aggressor, and one that the Moabite people seems to be the defenders, and then they make a sacrifice and win that battle as well.
We don't have enough knowledge to say. And again, in 1,000 years, they won't think there were two Persian Gulf wars between America and Iraq. They'll just see them as both one war.
Well, the reason that I was bringing it up, we don't really know, but it does seem like in one case that from the Jewish text that they were attacking, that the Israel was the attacker and the fortified position was Moab. Whereas when we see this from the Mesha text, it seems like that they were attacking a city of the Israeli people. So, so it seems likely, at least in the text, that this is two different things. Objective ethics. Bring you on stage, man. How's it going, Objective? How you been?
Oh, fantastic. Just, the usual work drama and stuff. But other than that, everything is good. This has been a great talk so far. Before I have a couple questions. I didn't want to break the flow, but I don't know, Robert, are you aware you've got like multiple links to different backstages in the chat? And the first one I was trying to use, I don't know if you guys saw me trying to pop in.
I'll unpin it. How about that? And then I'll repin one.
Yeah, that might be a good idea, because whatever one I was using, it kept just kicking me back to YouTube. I don't know. Did you even see me popping in and out?
No, I did not. This is the first time I've seen you come in. Hopefully that will work right there. Oh, my apologies. I wish somebody would have said that. I don't know if somebody was trying to come in.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's there's at least two different links there, which I realized I tried the second one, and that obviously seems to be working. So,
yeah. Well, there's a new link posted in there. Hopefully that one's operational.
Yeah, you guys are doing a great job.
Timelines look right, Curt?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, anything that's in the biblical text that's not like specifically attested through non-biblical sources, we always have to be a bit skeptical of. But again, like we know that there was an Omrid dynasty. We know that Ahab was a king. We know that like there's definitely some parts of we know Assyria did conquer the kingdom of Samaria. So some of this is all fairly well established. We know there was a Babylonian exile, for example. Yeah.
Sorry, Objective. My bad. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't displaying something here that looked like there was an obvious problem on it.
No, not at all. I was just curious. I missed the I muted myself. I didn't want to cut that brother off. I was just curious. There was I missed the first part of this, so I saw you may have covered it already, but I was just curious how far back you went and what sources you used. Like, have you looked into people like an Edward Dodge for his view on this pantheon and the original Canaanite pantheon where the Yahweh storm god came in?
Well, a lot of it's speculation. Curt covered most of this subject, but a lot of that is speculation as far as what we have on the timelines where the YHW showed up as the 1350. We saw that inside of Amenhotep III, if I'm not mistaken, Curt. We saw it in his shrine made to him, or his temple. So that's where we would have saw that on the it was written on a wall, if I'm not mistaken. So that's where we get our 1350 Shasu reference.
Yeah, and the late Bronze Age is definitely where we start to see in northern Sinai this distinct Yahweh figure first archaeologically. And again, so the explanation of why the Edomites and why the Sinai were associated with this god would need to be somewhere in the religious tradition. Otherwise, it wouldn't make much sense. But the specific, like non-biblical references, I think what you have here is pretty good and pretty well matched up.
Yeah, and I thought about defining out the timelines a little more, like the 722 and a few other important kind of timelines for people to understand the transition. And then after that, I think we're talking about 650 or whatnot. We're talking about Deuteronomy, I think, was found during the Reconstruction.
Mhm.
I think that's about our timeline.
650, I think, is roughly the King Josiah era, and it's not like
Yeah.
Josiah is the last king of Judah before the exile. So
No, I don't think so. I think the exile was, you're talking about like Babylonian exile. I thought there was one more. I thought that one was closer to like
there was
5.
one more, but he was in Babylon.
Oh yeah, maybe. But yeah, after Babylon, I heard Dr. Justin. Shoot, I can't think of his last name to save my life. He's a Mississippi boy, but he looks like he's from Israel, but from Esoteria. He mentioned that there was major reform during this Babylonian stint while they were out there, and that we might have had more of a oneness doctrine that come about during that Babylonian exile.
So it's you're technically right. There was Jehoahaz, who ruled for 3 months and then got replaced with Jehoiakim, who got taken to Babylon.
Who got taken? Okay, I gotcha.
And so there's maybe a year or two between the death of Josiah at the Battle of Megiddo and the actual Babylonian exile. But not that time is not enough to write the whole Deuteronomistic history or create modern day Jewish understanding. So Josiah is the last prolonged reigning Jewish king prior to the exile, I guess is a better way to phrase it.
Yeah. So he's asking for us to go over the need for the Exodus story to start with.
Yeah. So to go back to what I was talking about earlier, the very earliest tradition for Yahweh is that he's one of these metallurgy, Hephaestus, Ptah type gods who would have been an incredibly, like he would be like a god of cell phones today, right? Because during this era, like copper and bronze are the most powerful, the most mighty instruments.
Absolutely.
And so when these people are fighting over how to best to get agricultural implements and how best to build like homes and structures and how best to get weapons of war, they're going to be making them out of bronze in this era. So that would be a powerful god. And the tradition of Yahweh comes north to like the high places in Judah from the Sinai. And so you need a story to explain the origin, right? And he's associated with bull iconography. But as he gets into Israel and Judah, he gets these other attributes associated with the storm god Baal, such that during the monarchic period, I think Yahweh is a catch-all deity who begins to take on elements of the god El in his various forms, elements of Baal, elements of the original metallurgy god. And then also, as the tradition becomes more monolatrous on Mark Smith's categorization, he takes on characteristics even of Asherah, where there's a statement, I think in Genesis 49, where Yahweh is being praised for his breasts and womb.
Yeah, I think that's the only place that we have a kind of femininity. There's a female reference that we have to this god character. I think other than this one, I think they're almost exclusively male.
Now, there is a Tiresias tradition in Greek mythology where a character could have both female and male characteristics and be both nurturing and masculine. And so it's not actually beyond the pale or the idea set that would have existed in Palestine in like the 8th and 9th centuries that this kind of a character could exist as well.
So I wanted to try to give a little rope back to the kind of Christian perspective, so to speak, of the subject. Because of this question, why place origins elsewhere? I wanted to first cover, if you see the end of this Merneptah Stele, where it says that Israel is laid waste, its seed is no more. Kara has become without widows because of Egypt. All lands together are pacified. Everyone who was relentless has been bound. And you'll hear this argument come from many religious people to say that this was the time that they were taken captive, that the Jewish people were taken captive, that they were bound here, and that they were basically made slaves. But what we get in the 1350 reference that I mentioned earlier is that they are referred to as shasu, or basically nomads or wanderers. They didn't have a home to start with. And then we have later, and I wish I would have put it in the slide, but I think we get as late as 1100, we get references of shasu being directly associated with brigandry and kind of stealing stuff from tents or raiding small villages and whatnot. So we think that these shasu, and even in this image here, what we have is the people are considered spies. I think this is referred to generally as the Egyptians beating shasu spies. I don't know the whole text that's written above this, but the ideal is that they were checking in on the small cities for them to be able to rob those cities or whatnot at night. I don't know. A lot of this is speculation from the text, but that's a little bit more of the history that we know.
Yeah, and I'm not familiar with whether you know about a guy named Roland Hendel, but he's a professor. So. I forget which university he's at, but he seems quite knowledgeable. And his position is that the idea of bondage to Egypt was a present and real memory of the Israelite people, in that Egypt had controlled Canaan for a prolonged period of time. And they would have done things like have corvée labor where people had to go work on projects for the Pharaoh or things like that. But it wouldn't have taken place in Egypt. It would have taken place in Canaan. And there would have been a memory of Egyptian control and Egyptian bondage that predates the story of the Exodus as we have it now. I think you can see in books like Amos, there's a memory of being in bondage to Egypt, but it doesn't flesh out any comment about the Exodus story as we have it now, like with Moses and the wandering and the people like that. So his position, I think, makes a certain amount of sense also. But I do think that just as an etiological explanation for the nature of Yahweh being originally associated with metallurgy, it makes sense. And then beyond that, if you look at the Genesis narrative, right, the Genesis narrative is trying to explain this with the character of Cain. And the Genesis narrative is trying to explain the Asherah traditions with the story of a woman who gets deceived by a tree, right? They're trying to decentralize this tree worship and make it something that's viewed as negative. Well, how do you do that? You make the whole story of the woman and the tree be something that people are repulsed by.
Yeah. Yeah, the tree thing, I was curious how much association as far as the culture was with the bush being the one that was lit on fire, in that narrative to start with. But there was definitely this big kind of tree thing.
Yeah, so the best stuff that I've seen on the burning bush is that's almost certainly an exilic construction that was written after exposure to Zoroastrianism, because in Zoroastrian texts, the god almost always appears in an unextinguished flame that burns eternally. So probably that particular portion of the narrative would be quite late and not something that would have been understood by people. Is anyone
having problems joining
in the monarchy area?
I'm sorry, Curt. I think I'm having some problems with the link here, or something's going on. Has anyone tried to join that they're having any complications with joining? It seems like even Objective said that something happened, that he was kicked. So I'm not sure if this has anything to do with me now running on this Twitch as well, but I sure hope not.
Well, just to go off what he posted in the chat, yes, absolutely. The Chokhmah figure in Proverbs is a feminized version of wisdom that people, including Mark Smith, have associated with the Asherah figure. And this might have been an earlier tradition that was just describing Asherah, and the name was changed. But there's a reason that the temple, the Christian church in Constantinople is called Hagia Sophia, because the wisdom in in Jewish tradition, the Chokhmah becomes the Logos in Christian tradition. And the Logos, of course, then is one major portion of the Trinity. And the holy wisdom is actually the Church of Constantinople.
Yeah. Well, hell, Objective, I don't know what's going on, man. Is the link is just not working? Let me try one more time here. Copy that link. I have never had this problem.
Yeah, it's the one that I have that worked was the ER-RZPS-WYT, and I think that's the one you have the link for in the chat, right?
Oh, you know what? I wonder if this is the problem that people have been telling me about with cell phone connection and restream. I wonder if that's because Austin Sims mentioned that he that never would work right for him, but he didn't say really what it was.
Yeah. So is everybody who's having trouble getting in on a phone and not on a PC? Because if that's the case, that could be the issue.
Yeah, that might very well be. That's unfortunate. I might wind up having to rethink this restream thing if this is going to be a problem with some cell phone connections. But any more questions or anything y'all have in chat, please throw them up there. But I think we're going to probably be winding up here shortly, unless you had something else you wanted to chat on, or if you wanted to get back to the subject of Mark and them.
Well, no, my position would just be simply that what you see is gradual evolution of idea sets throughout this whole period, right? And that's what we would expect. We would expect no harsh discontinuities. When people are telling a story, they're going to tell it in the way that makes sense at their time, but they're going to draw on older traditions. Like look at Sherlock Holmes, right? Sherlock Holmes is guarded by copyright law for 75, 80 years. So the Conan Doyle stories are the only thing that exist. But once the copyright's over, you get like way more exploring of the concept of Sherlock Holmes and what you can do with Sherlock Holmes. And you get Sherlock on BBC and Elementary on I think it was on CBS. I forget who carried it. And you get Enola Holmes on Netflix, and you get like this giant proliferation of all these Holmes related stories. And there were no copyright laws in the ancient Near East. So you could just riff off whatever you wanted, but you were going to riff on something that was culturally salient, that had already made it in the market and had already made sense. And you're going to make a twist.
Cognitive association.
Yours, but you don't want to bring in something that nobody's ever heard of, usually because people are going to have like neophobia to it, and they'll think it's not great. So when in these religious traditions, when you innovate, you've got to make it look old. And you don't want to make it look like an innovation. You want to make it look like a restoration. And that's the tradition that's happening all the time. So when you read the prophets are actually innovating. They're starting a new religion. But they can't make it seem like it's a new religion. So they've got to make all these backstories that show that what they're really doing is a restoration. And guess what? That's the standard strategy to this day, mostly, right? And when a religion's really successful, it's usually because it was successful at framing itself as a restoration, like the Mormons do. Whereas when it struggles, it's often because it's seen as a novelty, like Scientology.
So there's two more time frames that I really wish we probably should have covered them a little better. We mentioned, and I didn't have the pictures at all. I realized I didn't have the pictures for the mentioning of Asherah that happened on the Pithis in Kuntillet Ajrud site, and I did not mention the other one on. It was the bench that has. So
I can share an Asherah. I can share some Asherah images with you if you
sure. Want. Yeah, and also I wanted to put a timeline on where we think that all is, and I wanted to clear up that this is happening both in the north and in the south. So we have this in the Israel area and in the Judah area, and we have this right before Josiah. I think is the timing on this here. Let me put this up there.
Yeah, so this is one Asherah image, and you see the emphasis on the genitalia, and then there's goat figures on her, and there's a man who's holding what looks like a snake that's part of her hair. And then when you scroll down, this is just a stylization of that. And I'm not sure if you can see like direct, obvious fertility imagery in this yourself, but I can certainly see it. And you certainly see trees and goats being associated with that figure, right?
Certainly. We got Lupin that's in here. I'm going to bring Lupin in here.
All right.
We'll bring him.
We don't need to share that for much longer.
yeah. Lupin, how goes it, man? If you're
Can't
talking,
really hear you, Lupin.
Chief. Okay, well, I guess Lupin's got something else going on. Not sure. But yeah, that's interesting. But the timelines, I didn't clear up the timelines earlier about the stones that were found with the magic hand on them, specifically mentioning, nor the one that the Pithis pots that says the blessings to Yahweh and his Asherah. But I think we're talking 780 is the time frames that these are dated on.
Yeah, and if you read through the Hebrew scriptures with the idea that Yahweh is symbolized by a rock, and then you read 1 Corinthians 10:4, where Christ was the rock in the desert. There's all kinds of like Christ is or the Lord is my rock, and Yahweh is,
and then even Peter
the rock.
The rock.
And then you realize that the standing stone and pole was the God symbol, and so Yahweh was symbolized by a rock repeatedly, and we see all these polemics against stone and wood being the source of like the divine being. It's not hard to see the continuity there if you know where it's coming from and where it's going, right?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I'll just let you guys talk. I just saw that you were live. I think I've seen Robert on some other channels. I can't remember where. Maybe like on Proverbs Guys or something like that, or Gangster Ghost channel or somewhere. I don't know where I've seen you from. I think I've seen Curt somewhere too. I don't know where.
Curt's famous on tacos.
Oh, maybe that's where they banned me. They banned me off that channel, but. I didn't even do anything, but they were like, they need to pay $1,000 for me to get back in. It's like, oh, yeah, whatever. All right. Hope somebody pays that because I'm not interested in joining. Go ahead. I didn't want to make it about that.
Did you have anything that you wanted to ask about or questions?
I just kind of joined in, and then I was my mic and stuff. My audio was set up incorrectly. I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about. I just heard. The last thing I heard was Jesus is described, or as the rock or something like that. Which
So in 1 Corinthians 4, Paul describes that everybody during the Exodus drank from the living water of the rock from the desert, and the rock was Christ.
Yeah, symbolically, sure. And
Paul doesn't state that he's making a symbolic reference there, but he definitely does say that he's using allegorical interpretations of the Hebrew scriptures elsewhere.
Yeah,
so that's certainly a reasonable position to hold.
Yeah, I hold that they can be both symbolic and literal at the same time. There's multi levels to the Word of God, so. Even the physical things that happen carry a symbolic and allegorical, metaphorical, and spiritual lesson within it. So, like I said, I just jumped in. I just jumped in mid convo. So.
But we know that the story of the Exodus, where Moses strikes the rock and water comes out and everybody's able to drink from it, we know that could not possibly have happened.
How do we know that could possibly have not happened?
Because there's 600,000 people, and 600,000 people can't drink from the same spring in one day.
Says in the depiction. Well, two things here, Lupin. Two things. First of all,
how much water came from the rock?
Well, how big of a rock can you imagine that we can get a stream that could water?
Have you ever been to a sports event where everybody's trying to get a drink at the same time?
Yeah.
Is it easy? or do you have to wait in line for a long time?
I mean, usually there's more than one vendor, and sometimes you got to wait.
Yeah. There's more than one vendor. Correct. Imagine there's only one.
Or sometimes you got to wait. But I mean, are you an atheist?
Imagine there's 600,000 men and all the other people associated with them, and there's only one source that they can drink from. And if you imagine how difficult it is at a stadium full of like 12,000 people to get a drink during a sporting event, you'll understand the problem of 600,000 people drinking from one spot.
How much water came out of the rock?
I don't think it really matters.
It doesn't specify. It doesn't matter. But I'll say we have another problem, Lupin. We have another problem. Is the water materializing constantly and endlessly, or is there a source that the water's coming from? And was the rock stopping the water source, or what is the volume of mass that has to now appear here in water form, and where does it come from?
I wasn't there, so I couldn't tell you. I've seen rock physically or water physically, be pushed out of rocks because they're porous, and that was a miraculous event. But I wasn't there, so
it's not a miraculous event. It's a normal.
They were in the desert.
That happens in physics.
He hit the rock. Out of.
Oh, you're saying the Moses story is a miracle.
Yes,
but in real life, rocks do seep water all the time through just natural capillary reaction. Are you saying that Moses was doing a miracle or not?
I'm saying that God used a miracle.
So it doesn't matter that there's a natural phenomenon that corresponds to it. The natural phenomenon, 600,000 people couldn't drink from what comes out of a single rock.
Well, that just shows you that some people would say, "Oh, water coming from a rock is ridiculous," but we just see it in nature that it actually does happen. So that just opens up that level.
We're talking about the difference between condensation, though, like a condensation coming through a rock, and the difference between water that can feed water 600,000 people. I mean, I can't even begin to express the difference.
How many people did Christ feed with how many fish and how many loaves of bread?
Oh, that's assuming the consequent. You're assuming that story is true as you ask the question.
Yeah. I'm assuming this story is true as well. I wasn't there, but I accept.
But there's no right. So we just have a different way of looking at it. You're looking at it as this must be true, therefore it can't be false. Whereas we're looking at it as how can we explain the literary production as it exists. So
I wouldn't know how to explain it to you. I wouldn't know how to explain it to you. I can't even prove that it actually happened. I just take it on faith that it did.
Right. So that's like a different way of looking at life, right? Your position is that you don't need to explain. You just want to think this story is really cool. And someone could do that about Star Wars, or they could do that about Harry Potter, or whatever particular mythos that they enjoy. That's fine. You can just do that, but you can't demonstrate it to anybody else.
Well, I mean, I don't have to demonstrate it. It's demonstrated in nature that it happened, but I was not there.
No, actually, no. That's
what
false.
Is demonstrated?
It's demonstrated that water can be absorbed and can permeate through rocks. So
that's correct. But there's no water that comes out of a rock that 600,000 people could drink from in a single day.
Well, do you believe that it even happened in the first place?
Do I believe the Exodus took place?
Yeah.
No.
Okay, so what are we doing? Are you an atheist? There's a ton of evidence that the Exodus.
There are plenty of people who aren't atheists who believe the Exodus never took place. There are plenty of Catholic theologians,
non sequitur,
Mormon theologians, Jewish theologians who don't believe the Exodus took place. So it doesn't have anything to do with atheism. It has to do with how you construct your understanding of the text that we have.
Mm-hmm. And from
God could exist, and there could have been no Exodus. And the Exodus might have happened with no Christian God happening. That's not how there's no relationship between your theistic beliefs and the story of the Exodus necessarily.
Well, as a Christian who believes in biblical truths, I believe it, and I believe that miracles do happen, and you have to look at it through context. And like I said, there's multiple layers to many parts of the Bible, whether it's Old Testament,
so Lupin,
New Testament.
So, Lupin, when you're making a decision about what to do in your life, do you frequently cast lots to find out what God wants you to do?
I rolled the dice whenever I joined this stream.
So you do cast lots to find out what God wants you to do.
Yeah,
And do you think a lot of Christians do that these days?
everybody does that. Every time you go turn on your car, you're casting lots. You're hoping that it works. You hope you don't get into an accident.
Oh, no, that's not the
Every
same as
day.
casting lots.
Casting
That's
lots.
so different.
What are you talking? Well, what define casting lots for me then?
So rolling dice would be an example of something very similar to casting lots. Casting lots is doing something that is going to result in something apparently random and letting the God determine what you'll do on the basis of the randomness, right? So drawing straws is a kind of way of casting lots, or throwing the I Ching would be a way of casting lots.
Yeah, gambling, placing a bet, taking
So do you
risk.
think God is in charge of each outcome of like drawing straws or casting lots?
At the end of the day, on a spiritual level, yes, but we don't fully understand that, and we don't know how it's going to play out as humans. So at the end of the day, I do believe that God is control, and we do have free autonomy and somewhat free will.
Yeah, but the Bible specifically tells you to cast lots to find out God's will, right? So
you
in the book of Jonah,
take chances.
No. It's specifically telling you to cast lots. In the book
verse?
of Jonah, when Jonah is asleep in the hold and there's the great storm comes and it's going to capsize the boat, they cast lots to find out from God who's causing the problem. And God has the lots point to Jonah. So they throw Jonah overboard and the sea calms, and that is a sign to them that Yahweh, the God of Jonah, told them who did it, and therefore they actually have to go worship Yahweh now instead of worshiping their other gods, because he saved their ship from Jonah's like terrible fleeing from the city of Nineveh. And then that's when Jonah gets swallowed by the sea creature, right?
So chapter 1, 7 through 10.
So God used Jonah as an
instrument. God showed that Jonah was the problem by the results of the lots. And then the Christians do that too. Well, the result is a story. It's a story somebody wrote.
Did they convert to Christianity? Did they accept Jesus Christ?
No, there were no Christians.
So they didn't accept the Lord of Jonah?
They sacrificed to Yahweh. Yeah.
Okay, so they didn't know Jesus.
They probably sacrificed to Yahweh's consort Asherah as well.
Jesus didn't technically exist back then, even though he's been here since the beginning of time and before the beginning of time. He's always
Yes, weird. Jonah didn't know about that, right?
Jonah didn't know Jesus by name, but
yeah, he didn't know him at all. He knew of Joshua the prophet who crossed the river Jordan.
He knew God,
but he would have used the same name for Jesus that you use for Joshua who crossed the river Jordan.
How would they do that if they wouldn't know? They wouldn't know what his name would be. But regardless, I mean, it was Jesus.
So Lupin, do you think that in Acts chapter 1, when the Christians are picking who should be the 12th disciple or 12th apostle, that they were casting lots to select Matthias or not?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
In Acts, when they are trying to replace Judas after he's betrayed, and they only have 11 disciples and they need a 12th, they cast lots and they pick a guy named Matthias. Do you think that God was involved with that?
What's the chapter and verse?
I don't know. I just read Acts. I don't remember the chapter and verse, but I know it's when they're replacing Judas. It's after Jesus goes up to the sky and then dies in the stratosphere because there's no oxygen. And then plummets to the earth in a ball of fiery flame.
It's Acts chapter 1, verse 20 through 26. They're casting lots after Judas.
So let's see.
So why don't Christians still cast lots in church?
So what did they whenever they casted lots, what did they do exactly?
God told them who to pick. That's God results. God's handling the results of the lot casting, right?
They left it to fate and rolled the dice.
No, it's God.
That's how they should
God
pick
does
the
that
popes.
always. That means when you're in a casino and you're gambling and you're losing, it's God literally fucking with you.
That's how they should pick the popes, man. Should get
Yeah.
everybody that wants to run, get them to pick a number, throw the dice down.
Or have them draw straws.
There you go.
Maybe. I don't know. I'm not a Catholic, so I don't follow any of that.
Yeah,
Well,
but you do
here's
have
what
to
you
make
should
decisions
do.
in your life, right?
You
What's
should
that?
ask whether you should follow that, and you should flip a coin. And maybe you will follow that.
Yeah,
I'll let-
you
I'll
should
let-
ask
I'll let-
God
I'll
whether you
let-
should
I'll
become
let-
a Catholic and cast lots. That's a good idea, Robert.
Lord, should I become a Catholic?
Now flip a coin.
Why? I'll do that.
You have to
to
tell
see.
God which result will make you a Catholic first.
I'll let God tell me how to do it. I don't know if I want to flip coins or draw straws yet, or
you
roll
don't
some
believe in
dice.
casting lots to
If
find
it's
out
higher
the
than
result.
7, higher than lower than if it's 7 or 11 or higher or lower, I'm not sure exactly what God hasn't revealed that to me yet. God just tells me that to put my faith in Him and believe in Him and accept Him as my Lord and Savior, that I'll be saved.
So how does
And then
God do that to you? How does God does God
through
appear
His
to
word,
you?
through His word,
Is God in the room with you
through His
now?
promise. Yeah,
And what's He telling you?
He told me to click on this to see what was going on.
Okay. Does He have a hat on?
No,
Does He have eyes?
I don't know. Well, Jesus had eyes.
What color was His eyes?
I don't know.
Yeah. What color was His hair?
The walking
seems-
Jesus,
Did He have a mustache?
he could grow one.
This seems
So you're
frivolous.
saying He was a man.
Jesus was a man, yeah.
everyone can grow.
So
a
He didn't
mustache.
experience anything of what it was like to be a woman?
Why would he?
Well, because the church fathers say that Jesus
can women and
experienced
men-
every problem that humans go through,
Yeah.
and that was the reason His sacrifice was actually effective, was because He'd experienced every single problem. But if He'd never gone through childbirth, I'd say that's a pretty big fucking problem.
Well, if you listen to the Gnostics, I don't know about childbirth, but there's some kind of association that he is a mix between a man and a woman, that he's something before.
Yeah, there's
the
second
division
century
of the-
literature.
Yeah, it's second century
Yeah.
literature, but the ideal was incorporated into the Gnostic ideology that he was something as a hybrid, the original Adam, in between a man and a woman before Eve was divided.
Yeah, like
And that's what they were
Tiresias
trying to get back to.
or Yahweh of the breasts in the womb.
There's some arguments that all of the feminine depictions might have been by request, that this was something more of a representative of both sexes inside of the characteristics. But
Yeah.
I have doubts in it.
And Paul clearly is like against the Aristotelian categories, right? He says in Christ there is no male and female.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
So what's the goal of this channel? Is it just to have like theological discussion or what? What's the goal?
I would say the goal was to get you on this stream because it's totally worked.
Well, the
Obviously,
name of
we cast lots
was the origin
in
of Yahweh.
advance, and Yahweh said Lupin will show up, and you'll have a chance to talk to him, and then
Amen.
it worked.
I mean, I'm here to proclaim the gospel that Jesus Christ is our Lord and Savior.
Yeah.
Right.
So maybe it it played out just the way that Jesus Christ wanted it to.
Yeah, maybe it did.
Yeah, I believe it. I believe it did.
All right. Well, you can let him know for me that he's a dick.
Oh, he already knows. He doesn't need.
He knows
me
he's
to
a
tell-
dick?
No, he doesn't. He doesn't need me to tell you what you think of him. He already knows.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the Landauer limit on knowledge?
I'm sorry. Say that again.
Are you familiar with the Landauer limit on knowledge?
No,
Do you know why AI costs so much energy?
because it requires a lot of power to run that.
Because every time you update a piece of information, you generate heat, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So does Jesus have like a brain?
You tell me.
I don't know. I don't believe in Jesus. You're the one who believes in him.
Okay. So you don't believe that Jesus Christ was a real person?
No, he couldn't have had all the knowledge in the world inside one human brain. It would have exploded.
Well, how do you,
So
well
much
he veiled some of his power. He veiled some of his godly power and knowledge.
So he
whenever
was like Clark Kent
Wait,
with the
wait. How
glasses
did he
on.
do that if the book said in him dwelled all the fullness of the Godhead bodily? That's in the book.
It did, but it was veiled. It was veiled so he could experience life as a human, for our benefit, not for him.
So
But
for some reason it was all in him, but he didn't have access to it.
after he resurrected, he has access to it. Yeah.
So you would say delivering a baby is not actually one of the important components of human life?
Why would you say that?
Experience.
How did you grab
Well, how would
that
you have a
in
human
there?
species if you never have any babies?
What do you? I mean, I don't understand where the question is going.
Let me connect it a little. What he's referring to is the
I'm a
idea that if Jesus was supposed to experience everything and he only was a man and not a woman, then there's a huge disconnect. Half of the entire society, he's missing something from them experientially.
Well, he gave birth to the Christianity. So
you
Do
think
you
he passed
think
it
that's
through
the
his
same?
pelvis?
what's that?
You think he passed a bowling ball sized church through his pelvis?
No, I think he died an excruciating death on the cross for our sins.
Yeah, it's not the same.
It was worse.
No, not really. It's about
Have you
7 hours. It's about 7 hours of being particularly unpleasant.
Have you given birth?
Thankfully, no.
Okay.
But I've seen plenty of them.
Do you have a wife? Has she given birth? So you don't know.
So-
you don't even know what it's like. You don't even know.
So,
what it's
so
You're
agreed,
just
but
showing
we're
your
not
age.
claiming.
Delivered at
You're just
least
showing your arrogance.
300 babies.
Hey,
I know
I'm
exactly
sorry,
what
but-
it's like.
Just yeah, he's a doctor. Point of order, though, we're actually
Who's a
wrapping the
doctor?
video up. We generally Curt, we generally run for 2 hours, and I need to
Yeah,
do some
we are
wrap up. Try to
out of
handle the
time.
last
Yep.
Q&A. I'm going to pull you off the stage if you want to chat a minute after the end of the video. We're welcome to, but I'm going to pull you off for the stage for a moment. We did have Curt as our primary guest here. I do want to do this last Q&A. And then we're going to wrap it. And if you stick around for a minute, you can chat with Mr. Lupin and I could chat with him. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and wrap the video, though. You want to try to address this question?
So the question is, if Jesus was from an outside Judaism and outside Roman society tribe, would that make his story less likely to be supernatural? Apache Jesus hypothesis, for example. This is just it's a very difficult question for me to answer. Like the story that we have, to me, is probably based on like actual historical individuals. But those individuals would have been apocalyptic, prophetic traditions from within Judaism. Certainly the fact that in the Gospels, Jesus is confused with John the Baptist by characters from within the text suggests that a large part of the Christian tradition was composed of people who followed John the Baptist.
Yeah. And I think there's obviously we already had some prophecy that mentioned the king of coming out of the lineage of Judea. So we kind of already had, if you're going to make a character that's going to try to be the Christ, you got to check the boxes of the pre-existing prophecy, and he was going to have to come out of Judah. So that's to me is a given.
And the second century apologetics are all about baptizing the Hebrew scriptures into Christianity and then showing that they're this wonderful ethical guide for people in the Greco-Roman tradition and world as well.
Excellent. Fantastic. I appreciate you coming on, Curt. I thank you for stopping by. We don't have anything scheduled yet for next week. We will be back again in 2 weeks. I'll probably try to put 2 weeks in a week, and I'll try to put a post on what we're going to be talking about or if I'm going to have a guest. But I thank everybody for stopping by. Remember to stay skeptical and be skeptical of your own self as well. Any last words, Curt? I'll give it to you.
No, this was a ball. I really enjoyed it. It was fun putting together the presentation, and I got exposed to a bunch of ideas that I hadn't really explored in this level of depth before. So thanks for the opportunity.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Y'all have a